Welcome to F4 Talks. With me is David Wine. He is a deep scholar and a sophisticated thinker and a cyclist as well. You can see he's got the lean, mean, hungry and fit look. And today we are going to discuss something that is complex, complicated, convoluted, and current. And what is it that we'll be discussing? Well, we'll be making sense of Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia. I repeat, making sense of Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia. If you're French, it is Chagos. If you're British, it is Chagos. But in a nutshell, we are talking about a place in the Indian Ocean. And even before we begin, David, tell us, where is this archipelago? And walk us through the geography, the history. Give us what you in America call the 101, the basic tutorial about this part of the world, sir.
I'll do my best. It's a pleasure to be talking to you, and thank you for that fun introduction. Hopefully, I am certainly very hungry to talk to you. Indeed, the Chagos Islands.
As are we. We greatly admire your scholarship and we admire your writing, and there are young editors, including one of them based in Atlanta, where you happen to be, who are great fans of yours.
Oh, well, you were super kind, and super kind to cast some attention on the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia, which get far too little attention in the U.S. media, certainly some attention in the British media and around the world. But these are very little-known islands and are actually at a time where there's not a whole lot of good news. Mm-hmm. This is a rare source of good news lately. Not uncomplicatedly good news, but it is a good news story of a small group of people who've taken on two of the world's most powerful governments and actually won after a decades-long struggle. The Chagos Islands are the homeland of the Chagossian people, the people of the Chagos Islands. And these are people who, unfortunately, no longer live on their islands, no longer live in their homeland, because the U.S. military in the late 1950s and 1960s came along and wanted to build a military base on their...
So let me stop you. Let me just stop you very quickly. Show us, you have a globe somewhere in your room. Show us, where are the islands?
I do, thanks to my friend Zin, whose room I'm nicely using while I'm here in Atlanta. I'm usually based in California. The Chagos Islands, for those who, and most have no idea, I had no idea what the Chagos Islands were. I vaguely had heard of Diego Garcia from the first Gulf War, the first war where the United States invaded Iraq in 1991. The Chagos Islands, and the largest island in that archipelago, Diego Garcia, are smack dab in the middle of the Indian Ocean, halfway between Africa and Indonesia, more or less due south of India, but very isolated, 900 miles from the southern tip of India, and among the most isolated islands in the world, on which there is now a very large U.S. military base here. This space has been there since the late 1960s and early 1970s, and during the process of building the base, the U.S. government, with the help of the British government, forcibly removed the entire Chagossian people from all their islands, not just Diego Garcia, but surrounding islands that they had inhabited since...
So very quickly. Yes, we are running into current history, but by the way, unlike you, we were very aware of these islands growing up in India. My father he's a military surgeon, or was a military surgeon. He operated 72 hours in the 1971 war. And India was an ally, de facto, if not de jure, of the Soviet Union. And Diego Garcia was this specter that hung over Indian military, that the Seventh Fleet would sail out and give us a rap, or give Indians a rap on the knuckles when I was growing up. So we were very aware of Diego Garcia because it's the Indian Ocean after all. And if I remember correctly, please correct me because you're the scholar here, these were largely uninhabited until the Portuguese showed up. Is that correct? And then they populated the islands through African slaves and Indian indentured labor. And then the British took over these islands. And these islands were considered a part of Mauritius or Seychelles, something like that. And Mauritius and Seychelles was also a part of Mauritius, but then I think they separated these, if I remember correctly. Is my history correct?
Your colonial history is impressive, incredibly impressive.
I don't know. I come from the colonies, mate. Don't give me too much credit.
As far as we know, the islands were uninhabited until around the time of the American Revolution, the American Revolution that gained independence for what is now the United States from Britain and the British Empire. So we're talking the late 18th century.
Yeah.
As far as anyone knows, there was a Portuguese explorer who claimed to have seen the islands first. Probably some other explorers saw them previously, but it was
I'm
first.
Sure some Arab explorers saw them previously as well, and probably some Indian ones too. But the Portuguese, to be fair to them, were very good at mapping out and recording their so-called discoveries very well.
Precisely. And that's where we get the name Diego Garcia and Chagos. But it was the French who first settled the islands, and indeed by importing Africans enslaved and stolen from both Madagascar and mainland Africa. And then also joined by indentured laborers from India, and over time, a diverse,
quite like British Guyana or Caribbean, or any of the islands where they were growing sugar, or
Trinidad,
because they needed labor. So,
indeed, and in many ways, Mauritius and the Seychelles and the Chagos Islands are part of the same colonial world as the West Indies. Very similar histories, and including a history of imperial succession. So we see Britain take the islands from France in the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century.
The Treaty of Paris,
correct,
the Napoleonic Wars. So we can thank Horatio Nelson and Duke of Wellington, who of course was Arthur Wellesley and spent much of his life in India, conquering a lot of India.
Yeah, this is a story of conquest and colonization, but it's also a story of a people who were colonized.
Very quickly, one fact people should know, that Seychelles and Mauritius were one till 1903. 1903 is when Mauritius and Seychelles break apart, and
both British colonies.
Both British colonies, and it's 1965 when there is an agreement between the UK and the US. For establishing defense and communications facilities. And they are doing so. Why? Everyone should remember this is the height of the Cold War. This is the time when the Berlin Wall is still standing, and there is real fear of the Soviet Union. And therefore, having a base in the Indian Ocean is important. India, by this time, is increasingly seen as leaning to the Soviets. So Diego Garcia then becomes extremely important. And it's between 1967 and 1973, Britain removes the Iluwa or I don't know how to pronounce them, or Chagossians, these descendants of African slaves and Indian indentured labor, plantation workers. And 1968. They get the choice of moving either to Seychelles or to Mauritius, not to the UK.
We should put that word "choice" in quotation marks, because of course what happened was
over to you now.
British government agents, at the direction of the U.S. government, and with the help of a secret $14 million payment that the U.S. government made to Britain, and they did it in a way that actually avoided any notification of both Congress and Parliament. So this whole story, part of the reason no one has heard of it is because it was carried out in secret from the beginning. News eventually came out. The story was broken in the mid-1970s, actually, in the US and British press, years after the Chagossians had been displaced. So it was carried out in secret with the help of this $14 million secret payment. And indeed, it was British government agents at the direction of the U.S. government and with the help of U.S. Navy personnel who told the Chagossians on Diego Garcia first they were being evicted. They would have no choice but to leave. Their only choice was to decide whether to go to some of the other Chagos Islands initially or to go to Mauritius or the Seychelles. Eventually, the remaining Chagos Islands were also swept of their populations, cleansed, ethnically cleansed, and all the Chagossians were dumped in either Mauritius or the Seychelles. Most ended up in Mauritius in the Western Indian Ocean. A smaller number ended up in the Seychelles, and they lived there in exile and have lived there in exile to this day. The good news is that they are closer to returning home after struggling for all these years from the start of their exile, struggling, demanding to go home and demanding some proper compensation for what's been stolen from them and for the suffering and extreme poverty that most have experienced in exile. They are closer to achieving that justice than ever before.
Quick question. How did the money go? Was it the CIA? Was it US Navy? And how did it escape congressional scrutiny? What was the mechanism?
They found a helpful maneuver where the British military owed the U.S. government money on the development costs, research and development costs for a nuclear missile. And what the U.S. Pentagon did was to erase part of that debt. And that's, another way of affecting a payment by just erasing a debt. But they could do it without notifying Congress or Parliament, and thus without having to ask for an appropriation, a congressional appropriation to make a payment. And that's how they kept it secret. Similarly, when they finally had to ask for money to build the base in the early 1970s, they simply lied to members of Congress. That is, Pentagon officials and Navy officials lied to members of Congress when they asked, is there anyone who lives here, any local inhabitants? They said, no, just some transient
this is in the
laborers.
Congressional records today.
Yes.
You've researched this.
Yes, I've researched this. I've studied this for almost 25 years. Others, beginning with the Chagossians, of course, have studied and spoken out on their own history for years. But indeed, I wrote a book on the subject, Island of Shame, where I detail this history and show the documents.
Those of you who are interested in this, please buy David's book and read it. It is a small archipelago, but very strategic. Remember that Diego Garcia was important during the Gulf War. American planes took off against the Gulf War, that is 1990-91. It was important in 2001 when America invaded Afghanistan after the horrific 9/11 terror attacks. And it was important in 2003 as well when America invaded Iraq. And it continues to be important because if America is to command the seas in any future struggle for global supremacy, the Thucydides trap, as Graham Ellison talks about, the great scholar at Harvard, between a rising power and a ruling power, then in American grand strategy, Diego Garcia happens to be important piece of real estate. So an important part of the world, even though it is small in size, it packs a big punch. Over to you, David. Now walk us through. That is so much the geopolitical side. Walk us through.
Although I think we should just briefly, before we get back to the Chagossians, who really are the beating heart of this story and deserve our attention first and foremost, because they've been just trampled upon, their rights, their lives. And of course, this is not a unique story. There are direct links to the displacement and dispossession and of course, mass murder, genocide of Native American peoples. There are similar histories of people being displaced during the creation of U.S. military bases outside the United States. And I've documented around 25 cases just since the conquest of Hawaii alone. But I think I do just want to call attention to the claims of strategic importance. Indeed, part of this story is a long-term imperial story. The reason the French and the British were interested in Diego Garcia was for achieving geopolitical and imperial control in the Indian Ocean and the broader region. While the islands are far from pretty much everywhere, they're also within striking distance of a large swath of the globe, from southern Africa to the Middle East to South Asia and Southeast Asia. And that's part of why the islands appealed to British imperialists, French imperialists, and then later U.S. imperialists. There are indeed claims that these are, strategically important islands, one of the most important U.S. military bases overseas, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, claims that this island is essential to U.S. national security, essential to British national security. But no one ever provides any evidence to support these claims. What Diego Garcia has been under U.S. control with the help of its British accomplice. Britain has occupied the islands illegally, as the International Court of Justice found recently.
Let's get into the legal bit later. I want you to draw out the entire legal chronology later, because that's also fascinating. We'll get into it's almost unique in modern times to have so many judgments, Court of Appeal, but we'll get into that later. Park that.
But I just want to underline what
geopolitical stuff.
What you pointed out, that Diego Garcia, as a military base, has been a launch pad for a long series, all the U.S. wars in the greater Middle East. I think, without exception, we can describe these wars as catastrophic failures.
The first one did well. I don't think we can say that the first Gulf War, speaking as someone who is a geopolitical analyst and thinks about military matters a lot. The Iraq War was an unmitigated disaster, and I'll give a plug for two podcasts we have done on the dialectic. Glenn Carl and I talked about the War on Terror. We talked about the Iraq War with Gary Grappo, my former chair. Anybody who knows anything about the region, whether they are from the Pentagon, the State Department, the CIA, we could go on, will tell you publicly, not just privately, that the Iraq War was a complete unmitigated disaster. The War on Terror also turned out to be a disaster, and we saw the catastrophic withdrawal of the US in 2021, 20 years after the US went in. But the Gulf War, to be fair, under George Bush Sr., did achieve its objectives, did safeguard the sovereignty of Kuwait, and arguably contained Iraq. So I wouldn't go so far as to tar the first war with the same brush. And it was also a war that had international law behind it, that had the weight of a coalition and international public opinion and all of that. So that's my only caveat, sir.
Understandable. And that's why I said almost without exception, I believe. But I think we can see any war as a failure of a kind, a failure that it has to be waged in the first place. But I think just I wanted to make sure people, when they hear the islands discussed or Diego Garcia discussed, and people make claims of their strategic importance, that we question that and question how an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean is essential to protecting the United States or Britain or anything. And to the contrary, the islands have, of course, wreaked tremendous destruction, especially in the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan and the U.S.-led post-2003 war in Iraq.
Good. So we've made that point. Now David, walk us through the chronology, which is, which begins apparently in 2000, that the British High Court finds the removal of the Ilwa. How do I pronounce it?
You're pronouncing it perfectly.
Ilwa.
So the Chagossians were initially known as the Ilwa, a distinct people who over time came about as the merger of people of African and Indian ancestry, and then actually some small amounts of Chinese and European ancestry. And first were known as the Ilwa, the islanders, and over time came to refer to themselves as the Chagossians. And as I mentioned, from the beginning of their exile, from the start of their expulsion, they demanded first to not be removed and then to be allowed to return home. And their struggle to return home has taken many forms, including lawsuits over time. Indeed, their first major victory as a result of a lawsuit brought by the Chagos refugees group, the leading group representing Chagossians in exile, brought a victory over the British government, which again controlled the islands. Again, a U.S. base on an island and set of islands controlled by the United Kingdom. The High Court in London, as you said, found that the expulsion of the Chagossians had been unlawful. And that leads to a long series of subsequent cases.
Very quickly, as a lawyer who trained in Britain, may I quickly give a little more color to the ruling?
Please.
So it wasn't just that the British High Court found that the removal of the Ilwa was illegal. The court granted the Ilwa the immediate right to return to any of the islands except Diego Garcia. All right? Now, this is super important because this completely changes the complexion of the islands themselves. Now, of course, the Ilwa maintained that they had the right to return even to Diego Garcia because the resolution of this dispute couldn't be, you can return everywhere except Diego Garcia. And then this goes into a protracted court case. In 2006, the High Court upholds this decision because, of course, the British government with unlimited legal resources keeps appealing. And then the British government goes to the Court of Appeal, 2007, they lose. Then they go to House of Lords, and the House of Lords actually in 2008 rules against the islanders, although the British government expresses regret for the original resettlement. So
exactly,
it's very interesting, and of course the British, being British, old colonial masters, far more sophisticated than the Americans, they announce a marine reserve covering some 210 square thousand miles, 554,000 square kilometers, surrounding the archipelago, which basically would create a vast protected area. No fishing would be allowed. All fishing would be banned. So the Chagossians said, hang on a minute, let's say we get to return. How are we going to live? Because a lot of them would have to live off fishing, as you do in these islands. So over to you. Sorry for taking that away and giving a little more color about the British legal system, which I have some experience of, as you know.
No, it's helpful and shows the lengths to which the U.S. and British governments have gone to keep the Chagossians out of their homeland and prevent them from returning, including the creation of this marine protected area, which of course British government officials said was, just about protecting the environment. We're green, blah, blah, blah. And immediately Chagossians were suspicious, as you alluded to, that this was just another way to prevent them from ever returning. And indeed, WikiLeaks and the set of State Department cables that were released by WikiLeaks helped show U.S. and British government officials deliberating together and conspiring together to create this marine protected area as a way specifically to make sure that Chagossians would never return home, to, quote, put paid to their claims to return to their homeland. That led to a subsequent lawsuit challenging the creation of the Marine Protected Area. Again, Chagossians, despite valiant efforts and some at least 3 times defeating the British government in the High Court, on every appeal, the British government won. They took the British government to the European Court of Human Rights. It's only when the Chagossians ally with the Mauritian government to take the British government to the International Court of Justice that they win their greatest victory yet. And that
There's
is
also the UN General Assembly. They went there in 2017, right? So tell us a little bit about that as well.
that was part of the process to get
see.
a case to the International Court of Justice, and required gaining the support of enough members of the UN General Assembly to put a case before the International Court of Justice challenging British sovereignty over the Chagos Islands. So what happened is that in 1965, you mentioned the date on which the deal was essentially signed off on. It was in 1965 and 1966. In 1965, at the direction of, again, or suggestion of U.S. government officials, the British government chopped off the Chagos Islands from colonial Mauritius. They had been one colony, part of Mauritius, and they did what was explicitly illegal under the UN's rules of decolonization. They chopped up the colony of Mauritius and created a new colony in the era of decolonization, and they called it the British Indian Ocean Territory. And they did this by bribing the Mauritian government at the time, which was negotiating for its independence, and British officials basically said, you have a choice. You can get independence and give us the islands, and we'll give you £3 million as a gift or bribe, or you don't get independence. It was not much of a negotiation of, it was not a negotiation of equals. It wasn't a choice. And Mauritian government officials took the £3 million in independence. Mauritius gains independence in 1968. The British go ahead with creating this new colony, the British Indian Ocean Territory. It came with all the trappings of a colony, stamps with the princes on it, which apparently are much desired by stamp collectors, flag and crest, blah, blah, blah. And it has one purpose. It has the purpose of creating a military, one or more military bases for the U.S. government. And again, the U.S. government secures that right by its $14 million secret payment, which is sealed in 1966 as part of a secret agreement where the British government, in exchange for that money, also agrees to carry out the dirty work of getting rid of the Chagossians. And as you pointed to before, they get rid of them between 1967 and 1973. And this is what is being litigated and eventually lands before the International Court of Justice, where Mauritius challenges British sovereignty and basically says that the decolonization process was not completed rightfully or legally, and that the islands were improperly separated from the rest of Mauritius during the decolonization process. And to the surprise of many people around the world, the International Court of Justice rules overwhelmingly in favor of Mauritius, backed by the Chagossians. Chagossians are sitting there in court with the Mauritian government. Their story of expulsion is told as part of the case, and Chagossian testifies with extraordinary emotion that captured the heart and minds of the entire courtroom, by all accounts. And indeed, by an overwhelming ruling in which the only judges to rule against Mauritius and the Chagossians are, surprise, surprise, U.S. and British judges who on some counts actually agree and rule in favor of Mauritius and the Chagossians. But by an overwhelming verdict, Mauritius and the Chagossians win. The International Court of Justice, which is then followed up by a United Nations General Assembly resolution, is ordered, the United Kingdom is ordered to end its colonial rule over the Chagos Islands as rapidly as possible and to return the Chagossians to their homeland. to the surprise of very few, the British government, backed by the United States, completely ignores the International Court. They just say, piss off, effectively. And for a few years, everything is basically frozen. And then there is a major development under the government of Liz Truss, a conservative government. In 2022, there's a reversal of policy, and she announces that she is going to begin negotiations with the Mauritian government to transfer sovereignty to the Mauritian government and to resolve all other related issues, including the resettlement of Chagossians. And negotiations continue. Under the conservative government, there's a change in power. Of course, the Labour comes into power, and they complete the deal late last year, shortly before the U.S. election. They announce that there will be a treaty between Mauritius and the United Kingdom that will transfer sovereignty over all the islands, but that Mauritius will then lease Diego Garcia in particular back to the United Kingdom, and on the behalf of the United Kingdom, or the United Kingdom will be allowed to continue to host the U.S. military base on Diego Garcia for a period of 99 years. There's some fear that once Trump is elected, that he will kill this treaty and kill the deal. And there's a concerted right-wing campaign in both Britain and the United States to encourage Trump to kill the deal. Chagossians and their supporters around the world, and many in Mauritius, were extraordinarily pleased when Trump, to the surprise of many, did actually the right thing and supported the treaty, a treaty that the Biden administration had supported, a treaty that the Indian government actually had also supported. This is a victory for actually diplomacy and international negotiations resolving disputes. A rare example of diplomacy and peaceful negotiation rather than anything to the contrary. And a victory for international law, a victory for the decolonization movement, victory for a small group of people who have been demanding their land back. The deal is not
story. It's a David and Goliath story, because
Precisely.
At the end of the day, Mauritius argues that it has been forced to give up the islands of the Chagos archipelago in exchange for independence in 1968, and the ICJ, in an advisory opinion, it was an advisory ruling. It wasn't a binding ruling, but in February 2019, they deemed the decolonization process illegal, and that weight of the opinion leads to this development, which is really rare. So it is indeed at a time when international law is under threat, under siege. It is the rarest of rare David and Goliath stories. So yes, I completely concur with your argument, David.
Yeah, it is a tremendous victory, although an incomplete one, because for a few reasons. But the treaty,
walk us through that.
Yeah, so the treaty does return sovereignty to Mauritius over the islands, which is a clear victory for Mauritius. They, in turn, lease Diego Garcia to the British government for annual payments that are going to total somewhere around in the millions of pounds in total over the 99 years. There's some dispute, and it depends how you value the pound. But in the billions of dollars over a period of 99 years, the UK government will pay the Mauritian government to allow the United Kingdom to exercise effective sovereignty over Diego Garcia and to allow the U.S. military base to continue to operate on Diego Garcia. The treaty also allows Chagossians to go back to all their islands except Diego Garcia, which again is a tremendous source of anger and pain to Chagossians, especially those who were born on Diego Garcia or have ancestors from Diego Garcia. So this is a major flaw, a clear flaw.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still a massive victory, because the right to return has been recognized. A precedent has been set, and we come from the common law tradition, both you and I, thanks to Britain, actually. No matter how much harm they have done, but the common law tradition is all about precedent. So it could very well be that over time they may end up back in Diego Garcia. So yes.
I think it's absolutely a matter of time, and Chagossians are clear that they will continue their struggle to get back to Diego Garcia as well. And there is the excuse offered for many years has been that military necessity and the security of the base on Diego Garcia prevent the possibility that Chagossians could go back. This is absurd. There are civilian populations living next to U.S. military bases around the world, including next to the base at Guantanamo Bay, other secretive military bases. Cubans are still working on the base at Guantanamo Bay. Civilians live and work on U.S. military bases around the world. There are similar isolated islands where it takes place. Chagossians could go back today to Diego Garcia, live and work on the base. There's also half of the island, more than half of the island, that is not occupied by a base. It's not occupied at all, and Chagossians could resettle that half of the island. They should be able to return to all their other islands immediately, thanks to this treaty, which still needs to be effectively ratified by the British Parliament. They're waiting for a piece of legislation which should be passed by the end of the year that would basically seal the deal. The deal also does provide $45 million for the Chagossians and their well-being. It is not framed as compensation or reparations, and 45 million pounds. If you think this is a population now that numbers probably around 8,000 people,
it's not bad. It's not bad, mate. They are getting a decent sum compared to many other people who've suffered. They are not having it too badly. I mean, it's all relative. They are not making Goldman Sachs salaries. Let's be fair.
It's all relative. And then when you think about, what some people get for a car accident, people will get more in a car accident settlement than most Chagossians who will get, if divided among the whole population, would just get a few £1,000s in exchange for having had.
Americans probably didn't get that much for the Trail of Tears.
Got nothing for the Trail of Tears.
And the Maasai haven't got much for the Mau Mau.
Small compensation.
I can go on. And so many of the Latin American folks.
This is why it's a victory.
Yeah, exactly. If you read Eduardo Galeno, what they went through under the Spanish and the Portuguese. So it's a big deal.
It absolutely is. It's a victory for an oppressed people, for a colonized people, for people of African and of enslaved African and indentured Indian ancestry. But it is imperfect, and Chagossians will continue to struggle for proper compensation, proper reparations, and for the right to go back to all their islands. There's also in the treaty, importantly, significant 125 million pounds for a period of 25 years that the British government will pay the Mauritian government in development funds. And these funds, Chagossians have been told, will be dedicated to rebuilding the Chagos Islands and resettling Chagossians. And now part of what I think people who care about the Chagossians and their rights and well-being need to do is make sure the Mauritian government makes good on its promises and prioritizes Chagossians in resettling the islands and benefiting from this historic victory. There is, of course, a danger that some powerful corporations and people will be the ones to benefit most from the treaty and this historic victory, and the Chagossians will once again, their rights and lives will be cast aside. They, of course, have remained on the whole tremendously impoverished in exile and poorly educated on the whole. Although one of the earlier victories they won was the right to full British citizenship. So there's now a quite substantial Chagossian population living in Britain, mostly in Crawley, south of London, some in Manchester and some other parts of England. And this part of the Chagossian diaspora actually over time has been able to gain better education than most in Mauritius and the Seychelles were able to accomplish, and in some cases improve their well-being. Others have actually suffered quite a lot in Britain from the cold and the challenges of being a black immigrant to an island that actually they can claim belonging to because they have citizenship, but have often been treated, of course, as outsiders.
Yeah. Question. I mean, if they were impoverished, if they were in poverty, if they were poorly educated, who was fighting the court cases for them? Did they have British King's Council, earlier Queen's Council? Did it become a rallying flag? Did it become a cause célèbre? Because carrying on a protracted legal process, particularly an international one, is number one, not easy, and number two, not inexpensive. So what gave them the ability to succeed, or to struggle rather, for so long?
Indeed, it has been a case and a story and a struggle that people around the world, when they hear about it, I think people's hearts are very easily touched. It's a very simple story of people having their homes stolen from them, and I think most people can relate to the idea of, many of your listeners, I'm sure, either themselves or perhaps their ancestors have had their homeland stolen from them. It's a story that many people can relate to, and just thinking of one's own home and what it would feel like to have it overnight.
Some of us from the old world, my family ended up on the losing side of history. It's an old family, so we just take it for granted. We lost, we didn't do our push-ups, c'est la vie, move on.
That's one way to look at it.
We can't go back. The other way is, okay, bring on the bayonets and let's put them into the stomachs of traitors who basically took our land, but by collaborating with the British, or before that, with the Nawab of Awadh, or the Mughals, or the Pashtuns, or the Turks. So what do you do? The question is that, yes, you can get involved in that protracted reclaiming of your land, or you get an education, move on, as I have done, and my brother has done, as my family has done.
Well, in the case of the Chagossians, most members of the community have been supportive of this struggle. It's been a struggle led by Chagossians, mostly Chagossian women in Mauritius and in Britain and the Seychelles, and led by, in recent decades, by the Chagos refugees group and its leader, Olivier Bancu, who was inspired and trained by his mother, Rita Bancu, and the group of women who created the Chagos refugees group. Incredibly fierce women who went to jail, led hunger strikes, and none of the successes and victories would have been possible without them and what they sacrificed. But Olivier was one of the better educated members of the community in Mauritius. He was and is an electrician working for the Central Electric Company in Mauritius. And he was able to, with the help of some lawyers doing a lot of pro bono work, basically take this case forward, and with the help of what in the United States we would generally refer to as legal aid, or the legal aid system.
And who are these lawyers? Do you know names of these lawyers? They probably are very good at what they do. They must have a great grasp of international law, constitutional law. Who are these?
They are extraordinarily impressive. Olivier, too, he essentially is a lawyer now.
I know, of course. He must know more than the lawyers. He's been doing this for such a long time.
Precisely, decades.
Who are the lawyers? Do we know their names?
Robin Mardamutu is the lead Mauritian lawyer. Tremendous lawyer, works now for Denton's law firm.
I know Denton's. Yeah.
Okay. Richard Gifford was the lead lawyer for many years in Britain, who brought the initial cases. They brought on barristers. Correct me if my British legal barristers
Absolutely.
like Sir Sidney.
Barristers argue in court, and
Sir
solicitors
Sidney.
prepare the cases for court.
Yes.
You're spot
Sir
on. Absolutely spot on.
Sir
And
Sidney
the top
Kentridge.
barristers become King's Counsel, earlier Queen's Counsel, and they are known as silks. And generally, they are. Some of them are extraordinarily well trained. You think
Yes.
American lawyers are good? Wait till you meet QCs or now KCs.
Yeah, no, I had a chance to sit in on some of the cases before the High Court and before the House of Lords, and in fact, the Law Lords at the time.
Yeah.
Now there's a British Supreme Court, but Sir Sidney Kentridge, who was Nelson Mandela's lawyer, was one of the lawyers representing the Chagossians and before the Law Lords, the highest court in Britain. As part of
I must give a shout out to two people who from Oxford who. Both of whom knew Mandela. One of them was my tutor, Michael Hart, the legendary Michael Hart at Brasenose College, and the other, John Rowett, who was the first head of the Mandela Rhodes Trust, who was a spectacularly brilliant, well-traveled, very sophisticated. So both of them, were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle and knew the gentleman you just mentioned.
And indeed,
I'm assuming they knew. I'm sure.
I assume they did as well. And indeed, the South African government has been one of those and South African people have been among those most supportive of the Chagossians at the United Nations and elsewhere, supporting their struggle. And I would just mention two other lawyers. Michael Tiger was the lead U.S. lawyer. There was a parallel set of lawsuits brought against the U.S. government and former U.S. government officials and some of the corporations that built the base on Diego Garcia, including Kellogg, Brown and Root, and the company is affiliated with our former criminal vice president, Dick Cheney, who was the head of Halliburton, Kellogg, Brown and Root.
To be fair, he hasn't been convicted.
True.
Yes,
true.
So when you call him a criminal, you are opening yourself up to libel. You can say that he was unsavory. You can say that he was unprincipled. You can say he was the real power behind the throne. You can say he was ideological. You can say he was surrounded by neoconservatives who believed in torture. All of that would hold up in a court of law, my dear friend. But calling him a criminal might not.
Fair enough. He was one of, I think, many people who we could describe as war criminals, given the crimes of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, of directing those wars, but indeed convicted of and tried for nothing yet. But Philippe Sands is the other key legal figure, and he's a lawyer and an author and an academic who represented the Mauritian government and the Chagossians and wrote a book about the subject, The Last Colony, which is a tremendous resource for learning about the Chagossian struggle and the case before the International Court of Justice that brought this huge victory. And then that's where we stand now, with the Chagossians closer to returning home than ever before. But still with a long way to go, and beginning with the hard work of rebuilding the islands, where there is effectively no infrastructure. They're the ruins of some of their old homes and some of the old plantation managers' homes, as well as a bit of the ruins of the plantation infrastructure. But basically, the islands have to be rebuilt from scratch. And, some would say, oh, that's impossible. It's never going to happen. Some would worry about climate change. There's something about the structure of the Indian Ocean that makes the middle of the Indian Ocean actually relatively safe from rising sea levels.
I did not know that.
And of course, Diego Garcia, the base there, is not about to leave anytime soon. So
it's not like the Maldives, which is
no,
under huge risk of going under.
Exactly. And protections can be made for the
Yeah.
longer term. And there are many ways to make these islands viable and life on them viable. But, many challenges as well. So that's why Chagossians are, as we speak, working on a resettlement plan, both for the political structure that would exist there, as well as the economic structures of life and other facets of what resettlement will look like, which is a tremendously exciting thing to be able to say.
Yeah. So I mean, they have a small community, so they should be able to have a functional democracy. Not too many interest groups. They probably are, even though they have been exiles and expats, they probably have enough social cohesion. The struggle may have forged a spirit of social cohesion, what Ibn Khaldun called asabia.
It has, although it's worth pointing out that not surprisingly, especially in the larger context and history of British colonialism, the British government has encouraged division within the community, and divisions are always exist in any community.
The Romans did that:
divide and rule,
divide and rule. What's new?
There are some Chagossians who are actually quite critical of I think all Chagossians are critical of the treaty in parts. The majority of Chagossians and groups representing Chagossians in different parts of the world have supported the treaty and will continue to press for the right to return to Diego Garcia and proper compensation, as I mentioned. But there are a few smaller Chagossian groups, mostly in Britain, some in Mauritius, who either are in favor of Chagossian sovereignty, self-determination, and want to push for that, or in a smaller proportion would like to see Britain remain as the sovereign over the Chagos Islands. And so there are some divisions within the community, and that's, of course, to be expected.
So, all right, so there are divisions. Sure, and some people would like to be independent or continue to be subjects of the crown. That is the political side. On the economic side, what will people do there now that I don't know if they can still do fishing or not, number one. And number two, where will the structures to build homes come from? Where will the expertise come from? Where will the money come from? Who will foot the bill? Those are questions that pop into my head.
Sure, and this is precisely what Chagossians are working on right now. Most importantly, again, there is a considerable amount of money built into the treaty, £125 million for 25 years, per year for 25 years, that for development funds that the Mauritian government will receive, and that could surely pay to rebuild the infrastructure and resettle Chagossians. Estimates of resettlement costs are within that range. You can begin with a small scale resettlement and then grow bigger, starting with one island and then moving to others. And there are a number of possible sort of economic bases for life in the islands. Chagossians are thinking about, indeed, fishing, some small-scale copra, coconut industries. The islands were mostly ran around and existed around the cultivation of coconuts and copra.
They could use Harry Belafonte's coconut song to brand themselves as the most organic coconut producer in the world.
Quite, that is certainly one, and the islands haven't
coconut water.
Indeed, that's a good idea. Chagos cocoa, and the islands are these gorgeous islands that effectively have been untouched by human habitation for more than half a century. There are some wealthy yachties, as they're referred to, people with yachts who've stopped on the islands and spend weeks and sometimes months there. But these are gorgeous tropical islands.
Did you end up there on one of the yachts?
I sadly did not.
Wrangle an invitation.
I sadly did not. There was one journalist, Simon Winchester, who also has written about the Chagossians, who was wily enough to basically hire a yacht and then claim that they were having engine trouble. And they got towed into Diego Garcia. This is in the early 80s. And that was the only way to get to Diego Garcia. You can't go to Diego Garcia unless you're in the U.S. military or British military. But he found a way. In recent years, finally, I think a British journalist was able to get there. But they've been sort of like a holy grail for journalists for years. And one of my friends needed her computer, which I was rudely resting my computer on. I had expropriated it accidentally. So now we wait, and Chagossians, yeah, indeed, because the islands are so gorgeous, there are some tourist companies that are interested in setting up operations there. Though again, Chagossians need to be very careful to make sure that Chagossians are the ones who benefit from any economic development at all. And I think there's an argument to be made that perhaps there should be no significant economic activity, and that the islands instead focus on protecting the local environment, which Chagossians have long emphasized that they are the best people to protect the local environment.
The environmental impact of tourism can be absolutely catastrophic, not just the carbon footprint, but people start dumping beer cans or Coca-Cola bottles, or
there's some high
water, and then the paradise, the idyllic island paradise, becomes not so idyllic and not much of a paradise.
And again, that would be a tragedy, and Chagossians don't want that. And so I've also contemplated a model of basically Chagossian-only tourism, where most of the members of the community who were born on the islands are quite old now. And why shouldn't they be able to go back and be the ones to enjoy the beaches and the life there, as wealthy, mostly white European and U.S. tourists often get to do in exotic locales around the world?
We are drifting into something as a tricky territory, because you see, if you do not have tourism, and I grew up in India, which was rather poor under socialism, which meant basically that Indian bureaucrats got 27 bribes for 27 or 37 permits. And for many a community, tourism was livelihood. Tourism meant better nutrition. Tourism meant a window to the world. So it's tricky, David, to hermetically seal off any society. So perhaps the way forward might be some ecologically friendly tourism, which is a little more expensive. And yes, you get some rich white people or some rich Japanese people or even rich Chinese or Russian people, but you make sure that they are not throwing their plastic bottles and their beer cans and their accessories here and there. So I don't know the answer, but I'm just saying that we have to be careful with these models.
High-end tourism does tend to have a smaller environmental footprint. You could have the likes of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce apparently are looking for a place to go on their honeymoon. So they, in the future could imagine going to the Chagos Islands. But again, we need to make sure that the profits of any such tourism model go to Chagossians, not to Mauritian or other transnational tourist companies. So there are some major questions ahead, but again, we also have to remember that there is this very substantial pot of money to begin resettlement, and no economic activity other than that of reconstructing the infrastructure is necessary in the short term. So we will see, but first and foremost, it has to be Chagossians who decide, not of course outsiders like me or any other outsiders. Especially, I mentioned the white folks who I hope are not the ones who are Japanese or Chinese or Russian tourists. Racism, of course, has shaped and colored this story from the beginning. This is, Euro-American bureaucrats who were the ones who stole the islands from the Chagossians, and of course a longer-term story of racist colonial expropriation, and that led to the Chagossians' ancestors ending up in the islands in the first place. So there are many histories of exploitation and injustice that are actually, again, inspiringly being corrected, however imperfectly right now. And I remain incredibly inspired by the Chagossians who have led this struggle and will continue to lead this struggle and must continue to both lead the struggle for justice and be the ones to benefit from the victories they've achieved.
Excellent. On that rare, positive, cheery notes in the turbulent times we live in, when there are big marches in Beijing and now even in Washington, D.C., we can bid adieu. Those of you who enjoyed this conversation, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you buy David's book. Make sure you sign up for our newsletters. And we look forward to seeing you again, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.